The escape of Chapo Guzmán translates into two things: more violence for Mexico and more drugs coming into the United States.
El Chapo escape fears are not.
El Chapo,
the world's richest, most notorious drug kingpins, broke out of prison.
Former cartel leader is considered one of the most dangerous drug traffickers in the world.
Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán is a name synonymous with crime, violence, and the dark underworld of drug trafficking. Once the head of the powerful Sinaloa Cartel, El Chapo's influence spread across the globe, making him one of the most feared and respected figures in the criminal world. His ability to evade capture, coupled with his notorious prison escapes, only added to his legendary status. Yet, today, this infamous drug lord finds himself in a place where his power holds no sway. ADX Florence, the most secure prison in the United States, and perhaps the world. ADX Florence, often referred to as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, stands as a fortress of isolation and security, designed to hold the most dangerous criminals society has ever seen. But what makes this prison so impregnable? And why are authorities so confident that El Chapo, who has outwitted and outmaneuvered entire governments, will spend the rest of his life within its concrete walls? This delves deep into the life and crimes of El Chapo, his infamous escapes, and why ADX Florence is a prison like no other. To understand the gravity of El Chapo's imprisonment, one must first grasp the vastness of his criminal empire. Born into poverty in the rural Mexican state of Sinaloa, Joaquín Guzmán Loera climbed the ranks of the drug trafficking world with a combination of ruthless violence, strategic alliances, and an uncanny ability to evade law enforcement. By the time he became the leader of the Sinaloa Cartel, El Chapo had established one of the most powerful and profitable criminal organizations in history. Under El Chapo's leadership, the Sinaloa Cartel became the primary supplier of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and marijuana to the United States and beyond. His operations spanned multiple continents, with distribution networks reaching as far as Europe, Asia, and Australia. The cartel's influence extended deep into the Mexican government, with bribery and corruption ensuring that El Chapo's operations could continue with little interference. El Chapo's reign was marked by extreme violence. The Sinaloa Cartel was responsible for countless murders, often using gruesome tactics to intimidate rivals and law enforcement. Beheadings, torture, and mass graves became hallmarks of the cartel's operations. In Mexico, the cartel wars fueled by El Chapo's empire resulted in tens of thousands of deaths, destabilizing entire regions and forcing communities to live in constant fear. Yet, despite the violence, El Chapo was seen by some as a Robin Hood figure, particularly in his home state of Sinaloa. He used his wealth to build infrastructure, provide for the poor, and gain the loyalty of local populations. This duality, ruthless drug lord and benefactor, only added to the mythos surrounding him. El Chapo's notoriety is not solely due to his criminal activities, but also to his legendary escapes from prison. These escapes were not just simple breakouts, they were meticulously planned, daring operations that humiliated the Mexican government and showcased the extent of his power and influence. The first escape in 2001 from the Puente Grande prison was almost cinematic in its simplicity. After being arrested in 1993 and sentenced to 20 years in prison, El Chapo continued to live a life of luxury behind bars, with reports indicating he had free reign of the facility, access to contraband, and the ability to continue running his cartel from within. His escape was as brazen as it was ingenious. He was wheeled out of the prison in a laundry cart, allegedly with the help of corrupt prison officials. This escape, occurring just as Mexico was beginning to crack down on the cartels, was a major embarrassment for the government. His second escape in 2015 was even more audacious. After being recaptured in 2014 and placed in the maximum security Altiplano prison, El Chapo managed to orchestrate a complex tunnel escape. His associates, under the direction of his wife, dug a mile-long tunnel from a nearby house to the shower in his cell, equipped with ventilation, lighting, and a motorcycle on rails to transport him out quickly. This escape, which took months of planning and required extensive resources, was a stark reminder of El Chapo's reach and the deep corruption within the Mexican prison system. The global manhunt that followed his escape was one of the largest in history, involving multiple countries and agencies. When El Chapo was finally recaptured in early 2016, the pressure from the US government to extradite him was immense, leading to his eventual transfer to the United States, where he now resides in ADX Florence. The Alcatraz of the Rockies. ADX Florence, or the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, was designed and built in response to a series of violent incidents in other federal prisons. Located in the remote town of Florence, Colorado, ADX Florence is the epitome of high-security incarceration. Opened in 1994, this facility was intended to house the most dangerous and high-risk inmates in the federal prison system, those deemed too dangerous for regular maximum security prisons. The prison sits on 49 acres of land and is surrounded by multiple layers of security, including high fences topped with razor wire, motion detectors, and guard towers manned 24/7. But the real security lies within the prison itself. ADX Florence is divided into 6 security levels, with Range 13 being the most restrictive. This wing, where El Chapo is housed, is reserved for the most notorious and escape-prone inmates. Each cell in ADX Florence is a 7 by 12-foot concrete box, equipped with a bed, desk, and stool, all made from poured concrete. The cells are soundproofed, preventing inmates from communicating with each other, and the only window offers a view of the sky, ensuring that prisoners have no sense of their location within the facility. Inmates spend 23 hours a day in these cells, with 1 hour allocated for solitary exercise in a small enclosed area. The design of ADX Florence ensures that inmates are completely isolated from the outside world. Communication is limited. Visits are rare and tightly controlled, and interactions with prison staff are minimal. The psychological impact of such isolation has been widely debated, with some former inmates and human rights organizations describing the conditions as inhumane. ADX Florence is the culmination of decades of evolution in high-security prison design and philosophy. To understand its significance, it's essential to look at the history of such facilities and how they have changed over time. The concept of high-security imprisonment can be traced back to the early 20th century with the construction of Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Bay. Alcatraz was designed to house the most dangerous criminals in the United States, those who had proven too difficult to manage in other federal prisons. Surrounded by cold, treacherous waters, the island prison was thought to be inescapable, and it held some of the most notorious criminals of the time, including Al Capone and George "Machine Gun" Kelly. However, Alcatraz was eventually closed in 1963, partly due to its high operational costs and partly because of the changing attitudes toward imprisonment. The 1970s and 1980s saw a shift in the U.S. penal system toward rehabilitation and the development of maximum security prisons that focused more on containment than the extreme isolation seen in Alcatraz. By the late 20th century, the rise of domestic and international terrorism, coupled with the increasing violence within U.S. prisons, led to the construction of supermax facilities like ADX Florence. These prisons were designed not just to contain the physical bodies of inmates, but to break their will and eliminate any possibility of escape. ADX Florence represents the pinnacle of this philosophy, combining technological innovation with architectural design to create a facility where escape is unthinkable. While El Chapo is perhaps the most famous inmate at ADX Florence, he is far from the only one whose name strikes fear into the hearts of many. The prison is home to some of the most dangerous criminals in the world, individuals whose crimes have shocked and horrified society. 1. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Ted Kaczynski was a former mathematics professor who engaged in a nationwide bombing campaign between 1978 and 1995. His homemade bombs killed 3 people and injured 23 others. Kaczynski's manifesto, which railed against modern technology and industrial society, was published by major newspapers after he threatened further violence. His capture in 1996 ended one of the longest and most expensive manhunts in FBI history. Kaczynski was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, and has been housed at ADX Florence since his sentencing. 2. Ramzi Youssef. Ramzi Youssef is a convicted terrorist and one of the masterminds behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, which killed 6 people and injured over 1,000. He also plotted to bomb multiple American airliners as part of the Bojinka plot. Youssef was captured in Pakistan in 1995 and extradited to the United States, where he was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment plus 240 years. His incarceration at ADX Florence ensures that he poses no further threat to society. 3. Robert Hanssen. Robert Hanssen was a former FBI agent who was convicted of spying for the Soviet Union and later Russia for over 2 decades. His actions have been described as one of the most damaging espionage cases in U.S. history, compromising numerous intelligence operations and costing several informants their lives. Hanssen was arrested in 2001 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He has been held at ADX Florence since his sentencing, where he is in total isolation. 4. Richard Reed, the shoe bomber. Richard Reed attempted to detonate a bomb hidden in his shoe on an American Airlines flight from Paris to Miami in December 2001. His attempt was foiled by passengers and crew, and Reed was subdued and arrested. He later admitted to being a follower of Osama bin Laden and was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Reed is currently serving his sentence at ADX Florence, where he is kept under tight security. These individuals represent just a fraction of the dangerous criminals housed at ADX Florence. Florence is designed to be monotonous, isolating, and psychologically taxing. Inmates spend the majority of their time in solitary confinement, with minimal human contact and virtually no stimuli. The cells are designed to ensure that inmates cannot see other prisoners, and even during the hour of daily exercise, they are alone in a small, enclosed space. Former inmates and prison staff have described the conditions as akin to a living death, where the isolation and lack of sensory input lead to severe psychological distress. Inmates have reported hallucinations, depression, and extreme anxiety due to the prolonged isolation. The strict routines and lack of any meaningful activity make time feel endless, contributing to a sense of hopelessness. The psychological impact of such conditions has led to criticism from human rights organizations, which argue that the treatment of prisoners at ADX Florence violates international human rights standards. Despite these criticisms, the U.S. government maintains that ADX Florence is a necessary measure for containing the most dangerous and escape-prone criminals. Given his history, it's natural to question whether El Chapo could once again manage to escape. However, the reality of ADX Florence's security measures makes this highly improbable. The first major difference is the lack of human contact. Unlike the Mexican prisons from which he escaped, where corruption and bribery were rampant, ADX Florence operates under strict rules that severely limit any interaction between inmates and staff. The guards undergo rigorous vetting processes, and their rotations are frequent, minimizing the risk of any one guard being compromised. The second difference is the physical structure of the prison. ADX Florence is designed to be escape-proof, with layers of security that would make any attempt futile. The prison's remote location, surrounded by rugged terrain and closely monitored by nearby military installations, adds another layer of deterrence. The walls, floors, and ceilings are made of reinforced concrete, and each cell is equipped with motion detectors and pressure-sensitive floors, which alert guards to any unusual movement. In addition, ADX Florence's technology is state-of-the-art. Surveillance cameras cover every inch of the prison, and the control room monitors all movements within the facility. Any sign of tampering or an attempt to escape would trigger an immediate lockdown, with armed guards and specially trained response teams ready to intervene. Finally, there's the psychological aspect. The extreme isolation and lack of any opportunity to communicate with the outside world or fellow inmates make it nearly impossible to coordinate an escape. The conditions are designed to break down any hope of escape, leaving inmates like El Chapo with no option but to serve out their sentences. The psychological toll of life at ADX Florence is severe, not just because of the isolation, but also because of the sensory deprivation experienced by inmates. Studies have shown that prolonged solitary confinement can lead to a range of mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, hallucinations, and cognitive impairments. Inmates often describe feeling disconnected from reality, with some resorting to self-harm or suicide attempts as a means of coping with the intense isolation. One of the most concerning aspects of life at ADX Florence is the long-term impact on inmates who are already suffering from mental illness. The extreme isolation can exacerbate pre-existing conditions, leading to a downward spiral in mental health. Critics argue that the conditions at ADX Florence amount to cruel and unusual punishment, particularly for inmates with mental health issues. Despite these concerns, the U.S. government has defended the use of solitary confinement at ADX Florence, arguing that it is necessary to ensure the safety and security of the prison, its staff, and the public.
This isn't a prison that the inmates run. We run this prison.
The legal and ethical debates surrounding ADX Florence are complex and multifaceted. On one hand, the prison is seen as a necessary tool for containing individuals who pose a severe threat to society. On the other hand, there are serious concerns about the human rights implications of such extreme confinement. Numerous lawsuits have been filed over the years challenging the conditions at ADX Florence. In some cases, courts have ruled that certain aspects of the prison's operations violate inmates' constitutional rights. For example, in 2014, a class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of mentally ill prisoners at ADX Florence, alleging that the prison's conditions were exacerbating their mental health issues. The case resulted in a settlement that required the prison to make changes to how it treats mentally ill inmates, including providing more mental health care and increasing out-of-cell time for some prisoners. Human rights organizations have also criticized the use of prolonged solitary confinement at ADX Florence, arguing that it violates international human rights standards. The United Nations has issued statements condemning the use of solitary confinement for extended periods, particularly for inmates with mental health issues. Despite these criticisms, the practice continues at ADX Florence, with the U.S. government maintaining that it is necessary for maintaining security. The ethical debates surrounding ADX Florence are likely to continue for years to come, as society grapples with the balance between security and human rights. Chapo's global influence. El Chapo's influence on the global drug trade cannot be overstated. Under his leadership, the Sinaloa Cartel expanded its operations far beyond Mexico's borders, becoming a dominant force in the international drug market. The cartel's sophisticated distribution networks infiltrated almost every continent, and it developed intricate smuggling routes that evaded law enforcement across the globe. In the United States, El Chapo's operations had a profound impact on the drug market. His cartel supplied an estimated 80% of the heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, and marijuana consumed in the country, according to U.S. authorities. The sheer scale of the Sinaloa Cartel's operations meant that its influence extended into major cities across the U.S., from Los Angeles to New York City. The cartel's ability to adapt to law enforcement tactics, such as using submarines and tunnels to smuggle drugs, showcased its ingenuity and El Chapo's relentless drive to maintain control over the drug trade. El Chapo's reach extended into Europe, where the cartel established partnerships with criminal organizations in Spain, Italy, and the Netherlands. These connections allowed the cartel to dominate the European cocaine market, further solidifying El Chapo's status as a global kingpin. The cartel's expansion into Asia and Australia also demonstrated El Chapo's ambition to control the global drug trade, making the Sinaloa Cartel one of the most powerful criminal organizations in history. While El Chapo's days of freedom are over, his story is far from complete. His imprisonment at ADX Florence has had significant ramifications for the Sinaloa Cartel and the global drug trade. With their leader behind bars, the cartel has seen internal power struggles and increased pressure from law enforcement. However, the organization remains a powerful force in the drug trade, with new leaders stepping up to fill the void left by El Chapo. Legally, El Chapo continues to fight his conviction, though his chances of success are slim. His legal team has argued that his trial was unfair and that the conditions of his confinement are inhumane. These legal battles are likely to continue for years, but they are unlikely to result in his release. For the US government, El Chapo's imprisonment is a significant victory in the war on drugs. It sends a clear message to other drug lords and criminal organizations that no one is beyond the reach of justice. El Chapo's story is one of power, violence, and ultimately, imprisonment. His rise to the top of the criminal world and his legendary escapes have made him a figure of both fear and fascination. But his confinement at ADX Florence marks the end of an era. The fortress-like prison, with its impenetrable walls and relentless security measures, is the final chapter in El Chapo's story. A chapter where escape is not an option. As the most secure prison in the United States, ADX Florence represents the pinnacle of modern incarceration, designed to hold the most dangerous and notorious criminals in the world. For El Chapo, it is the end of the road, a place where his power and influence mean nothing, and where his legacy will be one of containment rather than escape.